Welcome to Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Goy in Singapore. The headlines. Pushing ahead with tariffs, President Trump will sign off his levy on metal imports later, despite concerns about a trade war. A private message is on its way from Pyongyang to the US. Could this be a breakthrough in relations between Mr. Kim and Mr. Trump?
I'm Celia Hatton in London. Also in the programme, a nerve agent was used in a deliberate attempt to murder a former Russian spy and his daughter. The two remain critically ill in hospital. And Hanan Hamza is one of Malaysia's top lawyers. The story of how she rose to the top as we mark International Women's Day.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London, and 8 in the evening in Washington, where Donald Trump is stepping up pressure on China to reduce its trade imbalance with the United States by $1 billion. The White House says that Mr. Trump is ready to impose tariffs on steel and aluminium imports, and he's expected to sign them off today. China has already raised concerns at the World Trade Organization, along with 17 other members. Earlier, I got the latest from our correspondent Chris Buckler in Washington.
President Trump wants to put in place these measures to try to protect American industry, despite the concerns of some of his own advisors inside the White House. But it looks like there will be some exemptions. That was made clear today at a White House briefing, in which they talked specifically of Mexico and Canada potentially being exempted from these 25% tariffs on steel imported into America and 10% tariffs on aluminium imported into the US. There could also be other countries. And the reason for all of these tariffs, the reason that's been put forward by President Trump, is in the interests of national security, basically to ensure that the country could protect itself by ensuring industries that are vital to that are defended, and that also applies to supplies. So bizarrely, that idea of national security is also being used for this idea that there could be exemptions for the likes of Mexico and Canada.
Is there a chance that the resignation of his top economic advisor, Gary Cohn, have anything to do with it? Or, as investors have been kind of suspecting, this has been a negotiating tool all along?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that Gary Cohn is certainly one of the big voices within the White House, who has talked time and time again about his concern about protectionist policies. He didn't always chime with the president, that's got to be said, but he was somebody who was valued inside the White House, and his words certainly have struck a chord with many within Donald Trump's Republican Party. In fact, there is a letter tonight that has come from 107 members of the Republican Party inside the House of Representatives, and the language is pretty strong. It says, "We are writing to express deep concern about the prospect of broad global tariffs on aluminium and steel imports, because tariffs are taxes that make US businesses less competitive and US consumers poorer." It gives you an idea that both business leaders and politicians are concerned about the potential of a trade war. At the same time, though, Donald Trump made his way to the White House with all of these claims that he was going to put America first. And while some will say this could potentially just be him trying to grandstand and put himself in a better negotiating position, the White House is saying by the end of the week he intends to sign off on these measures.
What the President and the White House haven't mentioned is the fact that the latest trade figures came out, and the trade deficit, which the President is rather fixated on, actually hit the highest level in 9 years after 1 year of President being in the office. Is that going to help his move to impose these tariffs or not?
I think what you'll see is President Trump try and use that to justify these further tariffs. I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but you certainly get a sense from him that he is determined to try and address that huge trade deficit that America has. However, again, you've got to listen to business leaders who say that they do need imports. It's worth reflecting whenever we talk about steel. significantly more, multiple times the amount of steel is imported into America that is exported, and that's because America needs steel imports. It's important to business, and ultimately that's something that business leaders feel that President Trump has to be reminded of, not least because they could pay the price for these tariffs.
Chris Buckler. Well, we'll have more analysis on that a little later in the program, but now let's look at some of the day's other news. South Korean envoys will bring a private message to the U.S. president from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un when they go to Washington later this week. Local media say the diplomats were given the message on Monday when they met Mr. Kim in rare talks in Pyongyang. The former U.S. ambassador to Pyongyang, Christopher Hill, gave us his analysis.
You know, frankly, it sort of looks like deja vu all over again. But what is very different is Kim Jong-un has never said anything like this. He's never suggested his nuclear program is on the bargaining table. So it is something new. And I think out of respect and cooperation with the South Koreans, I think the Trump administration really needs to hear this through and see if there's something there.
Also making news today, the Vatican has announced that an outspoken Archbishop of El Salvador who was shot dead in 1980 will be made into a saint. Oscar Romero denounced repression and social injustice in the country that descended into civil war. The church will also make a saint of Pope Paul VI, who oversaw sweeping reforms of the church in the 1960s. 4 people have been seriously injured in 2 knife attacks in the Austrian capital, Vienna. Police say it's not clear what the motives were or if there's any connection between the 2 assaults. 3 of the victims were from the same family. An American porn star has filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump, seeking to void a non-disclosure agreement about an alleged affair between the two more than a decade ago. Stormy Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, says the agreement isn't valid because she says Mr. Trump never signed it. Men and women in China are being encouraged to settle for someone who's more or less okay when choosing who to marry. The appeal, which was made in a leading newspaper editorial, urged people to be less fussy when it comes to picking a spouse. It follows concerns about the low birth rate in the country. And now some amazing pictures captured by Thomas Cray as he was snowboarding in the French Alps. Now just watch as the snow crumbles away in front of him as an avalanche begins, and then the whole slope literally collapses on top of him. But Thomas escaped in one piece. He was saved by activating a special airbag, which allowed him to escape being completely buried.
Now, police in Britain say a former Russian spy and his daughter were poisoned by a nerve agent on Sunday. Sergei and Yulia Skripal have been critically ill in hospital since being found unconscious on a bench. A police officer who went to help is also in intensive care. Tom Simmons reports.
Sergei Skripal is a man with a shadowy past. Relatives say he feared that it would catch up with him, that he would be targeted. But he was using his own name, living a normal life, popping into a corner shop last month for milk and bacon. Tonight, he and his daughter remain gravely ill. And this evening, Britain's most senior counter-terrorism officer revealed why.
In summary, this is being treated as a major incident involving attempted murder by administration of a nerve agent. As you know, these 2 people remain critically ill in hospital. Sadly, in addition, a police officer who was one of the first to attend the scene and respond to the incident is now also in a serious condition in hospital.
It wasn't just police officers and ambulance teams who came into contact with the victims. So did people who just tried to help. Could they have been affected?
As your Chief Medical Officer, my message to the public is that this event poses a low risk to us, the public, on the evidence we have.
Now the focus is on the nearly 3 hours between Sergei and Yulia Skripal arriving in this area and being taken ill. Key locations remain cordoned off, including the Zizi restaurant, where they had lunch around 2 p.m. An eyewitness who saw them there and wanted to remain anonymous told me something appeared to be wrong.
What was your view of them?
Initially, I thought he had mental problems. It was out of the blue. There was no one around him. He started screaming at the top of his voice. He didn't look right. he looked like he was going to lose his cool.
He and other eyewitnesses say Yulia Skripal had dark hair, as she appears in this picture, though police have already seized this CCTV footage from just before 4 p.m. A man and a blonde-haired woman entering the shopping area. Detectives will need to sort through a mass of eyewitness reports and CCTV to establish the truth. The government was briefed on the inquiry today.
We need to keep a cool head and make sure that we collect all the evidence we can, and we need to make sure that we respond not to rumour but to all the evidence that they collect, and then we will need to decide what action to take.
But life in Salisbury is now dominated by the response to the suspected poisoning. When a woman was taken ill at an office this lunchtime, this was the emergency services reaction. And this evening, teams in protective suits and respirators were at a nearby ambulance station. Someone has used a chemical weapon among the Sunday shoppers of this peaceful city. No one is taking any chances. Tom Simons, BBC News, Salisbury.
Well, let's return now to our top story. The White House saying Donald Trump will give final approval before the end of the week for the imposition of tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. I spoke to Deborah Lair from our Washington studio. She's the CEO of Baselina and provides strategic advice on the Chinese economy.
The response has been very measured, and why not? Originally, when the Trump administration had said that they were going to bring about tariffs, China was the target. And China actually is in quite a good position compared to where they thought they would be. Instead of the United States and the European Union uniting against China on the overcapacity issue, you have a situation where now China is united with the European Union and Canada, two of our biggest allies, in fighting against the administration on tariffs.
China's steel industry seems to be relatively insulated from the threat of U.S. tariffs. China seems to sell steel to many other countries besides the U.S. Is that an illusion? Could it really be seriously injured by tariffs?
There are two important aspects to what the administration has done. One is clearly the economic impact, and for China, it's only around $800 million. They're not even our top 10 exporters of steel to the United States. But the symbolism of what has taken place is also very important, because what the administration is doing is, one, claiming it's done under the umbrella of a national security issue, but at the same time saying that there are economic-related issues or steps that countries need to take. And all of this is being done outside of the WTO. The United States has taken the first step in doing an action against China outside of the WTO, which means that that is potentially now fair game for China.
And Deborah, just briefly, do you think, what could China do to hit back at the United States if these tariffs start to bite?
If they start to bite, there are a range of different things that they've had under consideration. One, they can immediately take steps to raise tariffs on some of our main exports to China, including agricultural products. They can slow down the approval of licenses and applications that a number of U.S. firms have in front of the Chinese government. But also they could take steps, for example, they're looking to announce a major market opening package, and they could exclude U.S. firms from that market opening.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. Police in Sri Lanka used tear gas to disperse Buddhist rioters in the city of Kandy after days of violence against Muslims.
Also on the programme.
I'm so glad I've had a bad day at work.
Bored of bowling? Why not have a go at axe throwing, the new sport taking aim in the U.S.?
Welcome back. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Goy in Singapore.
I'm Celia Hatton in London. Our top stories. Duties on peanut butter, bourbon and orange juice are some of the items the EU says it will hit with import duties if President Trump's metal tariffs go ahead.
A nerve agent was used to try to murder a former Russian spy and his daughter. Police have said Sergei and Yulia Skripal remain critically ill in a UK hospital. Now let's take a look at some front pages from around the world, and let's start with the New York Times, which has this picture of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un shaking hands with the South National Security Director. The story says this week's North-South diplomacy has left US President Donald Trump on the sidelines. And staying with that story in the Japan Times, which says that the diplomatic breakthrough is reportedly prompting jitters in Tokyo. The Japanese government is apparently concerned that the US will prioritize its homeland security over Japan's when discussing denuclearization with North Korea. And finally, in the South China Morning Post, trade entourage downsized after US objections is the headline. The paper says the US played hardball with China when it restricted a Washington-bound delegation from 40 to just 10 officials.
The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has withdrawn its top award to Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi because of her failure to stop military attacks on her country's minority Rohingya Muslims. Aid agencies say the stream of Rohingya fleeing across the border shows no sign of stopping. Almost 700,000 Rohingya refugees are already there. The BBC's Ambarasan Atharajan reports from the border town of Teknaf.
These are the new arrivals from Myanmar's Rakhine State. These men, women and children, they took this risky sea journey overnight to reach the shores of Bangladesh. These people, they say that they don't have any livelihood and they're also lacking food in their villages. They feel very intimidated by the presence of so many Rakhine villagers around their own village, and that's why they had to take this risky journey. It also shows that even though the level of violence has come down in Rakhine State, people are still fleeing. For example, here about 200 people came over last night, and we have been speaking to officials who say there have been a regular flow of about 80 or 90 people coming every day. And this is adding to this huge population of Rohingya refugees here in this country. Nearly 700,000 people have fled Rakhine State in the latest round of violence, which started in August, and they have been housed in various camps across Cox's Bazar district here. And the worry for the government and the aid agencies, they cannot estimate how many people are there, what supplies they can bring in. With more new arrivals, this adds to the pressure of the aid agencies and the government. Ambarasan Atharajan, BBC News, Teknaf.
Now, a man was killed by a grenade in Sri Lanka on Wednesday after a fourth day of clashes between the majority Buddhist community and Muslims living in the area. More troops have been deployed to try and end the violence. There have been clashes since Sunday when a Buddhist man died in Kandy after an altercation with a group of Muslims. David Campanelli has more.
Sri Lankan commandos patrol the streets of Kandy's outlying districts. All police leave has been cancelled, but they've not been able to stop arson or sporadic religiously motivated assaults. Through Wednesday, police used tear gas to disperse Buddhist rioters in the city who'd been attacking mosques and Muslim-owned businesses. The continued presence of mobs on the street is in defiance of security measures, including a These were imposed after a Buddhist youth died at the weekend during an altercation with a group of Muslims. Government ministers have been to see the violence for themselves, including this shop which had been set alight. A spokesman said the authorities were trying to get the situation under control.
Army has been deployed in tens of thousands in the areas, but even one or two people can incite some incident.
Tension has been on the rise in Buddhist-majority Sri Lanka since 2012, said to have been fueled by hardline Buddhists. They accuse Muslims of forcing people to convert to Islam and vandalizing Buddhist archaeological sites. But the Muslim community denies this. The authorities have put curbs on internet access to end the spread of hate speech and misinformation aimed at inciting more violence. Under the state of emergency, the authorities are able to arrest and detain suspects for long periods and deploy forces where needed. A local curfew imposed in Kandy is due to end at 4 p.m. local time Thursday afternoon. David Campanelli, BBC News.
Well, it's International Women's Day today. We often talk about the achievements of famous public figures, but what about strong everyday women who also serve as role models? Well, we found an example of one such woman who not only smashes through the glass ceiling in her profession, but she also inspires with her great attitude. Take a look at this.
My name is Harim Hamza. I'm the regional managing partner of a corporate law firm based in ASEAN. The visibility of women in the legal profession, and especially in partnership positions, senior partnership positions, has grown. I'm from a small town in Ipoh, Perak, in Malaysia. I wasn't in the best classes. I'm not the typical nerd type student at school. But yeah, with tenacity, I think with hardship, you want to come back and make your parents proud. Whenever I get the chance, I will run, sign up for a half marathon or for a full marathon. Another thing that I'm passionate about is singing. I do have a jazz quartet. I enjoy that very much.
Now, there's a new trend trying to find its mark in Washington and other cities across the U.S. Axe throwing is catching on among those who are looking for a new hobby but might find bowling or pool a bit too lame. Our correspondent Jane O'Brien went to have a throw or two.
You've had a bad day at work, or maybe you've fallen out with your partner, or perhaps you burned the cake. I don't know. But what better way to ease the tension and get rid of some of that pent-up aggression than lob an axe at a wall?
Not like the normal thing to do. I wouldn't think, hey, let's go do something that I could end my life with today. So when it comes to this, everybody can just kind of come, experience something new. It's a bonding experience, and it's a lot of fun. Now step with your right foot. Give it a good go. Just take it up, step.
Well, I hit the target.
You did hit the target.
That's a start. That's a start.
Really not that dangerous, as long as you don't throw like a crazy person and just try to have some fun.
Axe throwing is becoming alarmingly popular in the US, having made its way across the border from Canada. There's even an axe throwing league. That's quite a medal you've got there. How did you win it?
I won this by throwing large axes at wood on a wall.
How did you do it? Because I'm hopeless. What's your top tip for me?
I go with the two-handed style, overhand, no wrist action. That's a common misconception. No wrist involved in the throw. Yeah.
How does this make you feel?
Oh, it makes me feel like a man with a big hairy chest.
Clearly, my technique needs a little polish.
So, after half a dozen throws, and I promise I won't do anything bad with this, I'm exhausted, the axe is getting blunt, and I still haven't hit the target. But it's great fun, and I'm so glad I've had a bad day at work. Oh.
And so the night wore on.
Oh, come on!
Once you've mastered the basics, there's no limit to what you can do with an axe. And then there's that golden moment when it all comes together. Jane O'Brien, BBC News, axe throwing Queen of Washington.
What a great idea. Celia, shall we try and see if the bosses would allow us to have one each in the newsroom here in Singapore and London? I don't know whether they would let that happen. You've been watching Newsday on the BBC, but don't go away because I'll be back with business news. And of course, it's still all about that potential trade war after President Trump threatened to impose tariffs on steel and aluminium.
Mariko, I love your axe throwing idea. And because we've been talking about the International Women's Day, we're going to leave you with these pictures from Paris, where the Eiffel Tower has been dressed up for the occasion with the French version of the hashtag Time's Up. The message, which translates literally as "Now we act," is part of a campaign to open paths to justice for female victims of violence. It was launched last month by a group of French actors, directors, and producers. Well, that's all for now. Stay with BBC World News. Thanks for watching.